But thank you, Melanie, for that introduction. I'm going to talk about generative artificial intelligence and how it can impact the um, you know English language teaching and learning. But I want to start by asking you if you remember where you were on November 30th, 2022. I remember where I was, so I want you to think back to that day. And at the time, it might have not seemed very significant. In America, it was just past Thanksgiving. And I think we were just, we were going back to school and wrapping up our semester. But that day was actually a very significant day in terms of technology because that was the day that ChatGPT was released to the public. And so I still remember we were doing the Electronic Village at the TESOL International Convention, and we had a bunch of different, we were still accepting proposals then, so we had a bunch of different proposals submitted about ChatGPT, and so that was one of the first introductions that a lot of teachers had to ChatGPT, was through our Electronic Village. This is what ChatGPT said, pictures the birth of AI as. So when I first heard about ChatGPT, as Melanie said, I have a PhD in educational technology, and I'm sure Christine and Melanie will tell you that I'm their go-to tech guy. I'm the guy that you hate because when I walk by your computer, all of a sudden it starts working properly, and all those problems that you were complaining about just seem to disappear. But when I heard about ChatGPT, I was a little worried for all of the reasons that Melanie was talking about. Students are going to use it to cheat. I heard stories that ChatGPT would replace teachers, and I was going to lose my job because I would be replaced by an AI bot teaching students English. And so I had a little bit of fear about what artificial intelligence would mean for teaching and learning. But I also had heard wonderful things, like Melanie mentioned, lesson plan assistance. I saw all these posts on Facebook of people who are like, yeah, you can write a book with ChatGPT in 5 minutes and make millions of dollars selling it on Amazon. That doesn't work, by the way, but I heard all these great things. And so I was excited too, because I knew that artificial intelligence would be transformative in terms of technology and education. Maybe even more so than the internet was in the early 90s. And I also had a little bit of FOMO because, like Melanie mentioned, there were a lot of people that were already using it, experimenting with it, and doing all these great things. And I realized that if I didn't learn about it and I didn't get to know what ChatGPT or generative artificial intelligence was, then I was going to be left behind, and I didn't want to be left behind. And so I decided that I had to go on a journey to study about artificial intelligence and figure out what it was and how I could use it, and hopefully improve my students' learning experience through it. And so today I'm going to share some of the things that I learned and some of the things that have helped me as I've gone on this journey with artificial intelligence. So one of the things that I looked at was, what is artificial intelligence? What is it? What can it do? And of course, it's constantly changing. The technology is evolving rapidly. And so when you talk about what it can do or what it is, you generally have to talk in sort of broad terms. And so I looked into IBM and what their artificial intelligence team had done with artificial intelligence. And they grouped it sort of in two ways. They grouped it based on what it can do and how it's used. And so there are really three groups or three types of artificial intelligence. Okay, the first one is what they call artificial narrow intelligence, and that is, it's also called weak AI. And that's the only type of AI that we have today. And this type of AI really can only do one task really well. It has to be trained to do a specific task and it does it really well. For example, like in the picture, playing a game. Okay. ChatGPT is great at generating language and writing, and there are AI that generate images and do image recognition, but there isn't a single AI that does everything. And there isn't an AI that can cook my dinner and pick up my kids and write my book for me and plan my lessons and grade my students' papers. And so all we have today, right now, in this artificial age of artificial intelligence, is this weak AI. Then there's a theoretical class of artificial intelligence called artificial general intelligence, or strong AI. And again, this is all theoretical. We don't have this type of AI yet. I don't know when we'll get it. Maybe sometime in the next 100 years, probably. But this type of AI would be able to learn and do things generally as a human would, without being trained specifically. So you could sort of think of this as the robotic version of humans, I guess. And then there's the last category of AI, which they call super AI. And again, it's strictly theoretical. But if it ever came about, this would be the AI that would be able to do everything better than humans. It'd be able to outperform humans, outthink humans, learn faster than humans. This would be the AI that if anything was going to take over the world, it would be super AI. So then there are two types of, when you look at what the AI, how the AI can be used, there are two types.
Sorry, you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yes, okay. Sorry, somehow got muted. Um, One type of AI is the reactive machine AI. So this AI basically takes in a bunch of data and it looks at the patterns and makes predictions and does different things like that, but it has no memory. Okay. So if you've ever used Netflix, when you log into um, Netflix the first time, when you log in, you see your home screen, it has recommendations of things that you might like to watch. And I don't know if you've ever thought about how it determined what things you might like to watch, but essentially it takes the history of all the things you've watched and it generates predictions of what you might like to watch based on that history. And that's an example of reactive machine learning or reactive machine AI. That's why when your kids go on and watch something, it messes up your recommendations because now that's in your history. Um, there's another type of AI called limited memory AI. And this AI can recall past events for a certain amount of time. And it can monitor situations and different things over time. So here in Phoenix, we have self-driving cars, and that's an example of a limited memory AI. It remembers, for example, that there's a pedestrian over there, and there's a crosswalk coming up. It remembers there's a car on the to the left, so don't hit it. But it only stores that information for a short amount of time, and then as it moves on, it doesn't need that information anymore, and so it's gone. Another thing that I discovered that kind of surprised me is AI is not new. I heard about ChatGPT and generative artificial intelligence. I thought, oh, this is all brand new. This is a new breakthrough. And generative AI is a new breakthrough, but the idea of artificial intelligence and the research um, that brought us generative AI has been around for decades. And so that was something that surprised me. And a lot of it started with this man. He's a computer scientist from the UK named Alan Turing. And there is a test called Turing's test And basically, this was the first sort of experiment or idea to theorize that a computer could seem to be thinking. And Turing's test basically says if a person is having a conversation and can't see who the other side of the conversation, it if they're having a conversation with something, they don't know what it is, but they can't tell the difference between having a conversation with a human or a conversation with a machine, then the machine could be said to be thinking. And this was sort of the first test to theorize that artificial intelligence was possible. So that was back in the 1950s, and they started looking at AI that could play games um, like checkers and chess. And so this is still used actually as a measure of whether a computer is intelligent, is if it can play a game without being taught specifically how to play the game. When they started to look at what it meant to be intelligence, they started to, basically look at humans, and we would consider ourselves to be intelligent. So what is it that makes humans intelligent? And there were several things, several different approaches, I guess. And one of those approaches was logical reasoning. And so they trained computers, for example, to find their way through a maze by using logical reasoning. This is one type of research that they were doing into artificial intelligence and approaches to making computers able to think. And of course, another big trademark of intelligence is language, the ability to communicate. And so this is an example of a semantic network, which is essentially a way to look at relationships between words. And so they would use tools like semantic networks to help computers understand natural language. And of course, another aspect of supposedly being intelligent is uh, looking like humans with two arms and two legs and a head. And so they started to build computers that could walk and move like humans do. They call that automata or automata. But there were some problems they ran into as they tried to make computers intelligent. And one of those problems was that they had limited computing power. The very first semantic network, as an example, could only hold 20 words. And so if you think about how good of a conversation can you have if you can only say and understand 20 words, you can kind of see the limitation that they might have had with the technology back then. Another thing they realized is that humans, well, most humans, I guess there are some humans that don't have it, but most humans have what we call common sense, right? This pool of knowledge that we all learned as we were growing up in the world. And if you take, for example, the knowledge that a 5-year-old child has about the world around them, they know colors, they know shapes, they know relationships, family, they know foods, they know all these different things that they've learned through their experiences. If you take just that much information from a 5-year-old child, there isn't a computer on the planet today that could hold all that information. And so computers don't have that context and that common sense knowledge and reasoning that humans have. And that's a limitation to their being able to be intelligent. This is one of the reasons why we don't have that strong AI or artificial general intelligence today. So when you look at generative artificial intelligence, it's helpful to go back and sort of look at the things that have happened through the years and how did we get to where we have this generative AI. And one of the things that led us to this point is the concept of machine learning. And I actually teach a class on machine learning at Arizona State University. And machine learning basically is the idea that you give a computer a huge amount of data and you ask it to analyze all the data using certain algorithms and different things, and it looks for patterns and connections, and it starts to build these models, right? And so one of the things that they did was they gave the computer trillions and trillions of words and asked it to analyze the relationship between words and to build what they call a neural network. Um, um, the idea of a neural network was first brought up in the 1980s when the MRI machine um, became available. And with an MRI machine or a CT scan, researchers were able to look inside a person's brain while the person was still alive. And so they were able to see things that happened, for example, when humans learned. And one of the things, I love the biology of the brain. It's really cool if you ever have a chance to study it. But one of the things that they learned is we have trillions of neurons in our brain, and neurons have these long stems that come out of them, the brain cells. And the long stem is called a dendrite. And the dendrite is sort of like the tentacles of an octopus. And so the dendrite of one neuron reaches out and it connects to other neurons, right? And it forms these connections. And electrical signals pass through those connections, and that's how your brain sends signals all the way down to your muscles, etc. And they discovered that as people learn and make connections between ideas through association, there's actually this coating around the dendrite called myelin that works to insulate the dendrite, much the same way that we insulate an electrical wire so that the electricity stays inside and travels smoothly. And as the more you learn, the more this myelin coating appears on those dendrites. And so those connections get stronger and faster. And that's what's represented here in this picture of the neural network. The stronger connections are represented by the thicker arrows. And so when you ask the computer to make a prediction or to understand a pattern, it takes, for example, how many times the word the appears with another word, and it learns that usually after a the, there's always going to be a noun. So if it has to choose what kind of word to put after a the, it has that strong connection in its neural network that says it should be a noun. And so it knows to put a noun after the word the, for example. So I already mentioned I looked at some of the stuff that IBM was doing with artificial intelligence, and IBM made one of the biggest breakthroughs back in the late 90s when their Deep Blue computer beat a human chess player uh, at chess. It was the first time that a computer had ever beaten a human. And you can see in the picture here, the computer, the person sitting on the in the dark suit. I'm not sure what side he's sitting on for you guys. For me, it's the right side. But anyway, the person in the dark suit, he's the computer operator. So he is putting in where the different pieces are on the board into the computer. And then the computer is analyzing all the possible moves that it could make and tells the operator where to move the piece next. And the way that it beat a human being was it analyzed 200 million moves per second. Basically, every move it could ever make with any piece on the board until it figured out the best possible move with the greatest chance of success. So, one of the things that teaches us about artificial intelligence is even though it's intelligent, it doesn't think about things the same way that humans do. A human's not going to analyze 200 million moves per second to win a chess game, for example. We've had other AI breakthroughs, right? We've seen, I mentioned self-driving cars. We have these here in Phoenix. It's kind of a freaky experience to get in a car with no driver and have it take off, but we have them, and they're all AI driven. And there were several, um, projects at universities and whatnot that led to us having this type of technology. As I learned more about AI, I came across some terms
والله يا دكتور، عم
that
ببعت رسالة وعارف حضرتك يعني ما عندكش.
as I learned more about AI, I came across some terms that I think are really useful for people who use AI to know. One of those is what we call an LLM, or a large language model. And if you've used any of the generative AI tools that are available today, like ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot or any of those, most of them are based on some type of a large language model. And so a large language model is developed, like I said, by giving the computer as much language as you can. In ChatGPT's case, they gave it trillions of words, sentences to analyze, and it builds the neural network and the semantic network that I showed you to create this large language model. And so as it's generating language, it's using all that it knows about grammar and vocabulary to basically generate one word at a time to create a sentence. So this is a few years ago now, but I wanted to play around and see what AI could do and how it was different, for example, from Google. So I went to Google and I searched for the definition of artificial intelligence in Google, and I found this definition from Oxford Languages. And this definition was written by a person. And it says the theory and development of computer systems able to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence. Okay. But Google didn't create this definition, right? This definition, it found it somewhere on the Oxford Languages site and it indexed it. And then when I searched for it, it just returned it to me. So then I went to ChatGPT 3.5. I think we're on 4 something now. So it's been a little while, and I said to ChatGPT, act as an expert in artificial intelligence and define artificial intelligence to the average person. And it gave me this very long definition. That's the one thing I've learned about generative AI. It loves to talk. So rather than read all that, I said, summarize that into 3 sentences. And you can see it has a lot of the same components to the definition that I found on Google, talking about requiring human intelligence, computer systems. It gives examples of what AI can do. But it didn't copy and paste this definition from anywhere, right? It created this definition from all of that vast knowledge that it has in its large language model. And then I said, rewrite that definition for a middle school audience. And you can see it gives me basically the same thing, but it's used different examples. It's used some simpler words and grammar. And so that it really is the power of generative AI, is the ability to be able to create language each time and not just give us the same thing or to regurgitate information. Another really important thing that I learned about generative artificial intelligence is that the output that you get from it is only as good as the prompt or the input that you give it. So when we talk about generative artificial intelligence, one of the things that's come up is this idea that just like we used to teach students how to do Google searches, now students need to learn how to be literate with artificial intelligence. We call it AI literacy. And one of the skills of AI literacy is being able to write good prompts. So there are 3 things that you need in every prompt to make it successful. The first one is context, giving the artificial intelligence as much information as you can about what you want it to do. I remember I was working with a professor at Arizona State University, and we were learning how to generate images with Adobe Firefly. And so this professor typed into the prompt box, generate an image of an ASU student. And of course, the artificial intelligence didn't understand what ASU was. And so the professor got an image of a student. It was a kindergartner, I think, or it might have been an elementary school student. And so part of giving context would be thinking about, what does the AI know and what do I need to tell it? And how do I describe the things that I want in a way that it can understand? So we had to work with that professor to say, well, give me an image of a young adult sitting in a library wearing maroon and gold, because those are ASU's colors, studying a book on science or something like that. And then we got a much better image than just if we asked for an ASU student. So context is important. You also have to be very clear on what you want it to do, to specify the task. If you want it to generate a summary or you want it to answer a specific question, then you need to tell it that in the prompt. And the other thing that a prompt needs is what we call constraints. Well, these would be limitations or things that you want to guide the behavior. So I'm working on a project with a colleague of mine where we're building an AI-powered learning assistant. And one of the constraints that we give it in the prompt is it can't tell the students the answers to their homework. It has to guide them to the answer, but it can't tell them the answer directly. And so that's one of the constraints that we gave. In the prompt I showed earlier about getting the definition, one of the constraints I gave it was for the average person. I didn't want it to use technical language. I wanted to give me a definition for, a general audience. Another really important concept about generative artificial intelligence is we have to understand, well, we have to use it thoughtfully. We have to know we have to know some of the caveats, I guess, around using it. So one of the biggest caveats around using artificial intelligence is that it does what we call hallucination. Okay. It lies. It makes up information. Okay. One example that was in the news when ChatGPT was first released was there was a lawyer in the United States who had to write a court brief. Court brief is like a research paper for lawyers, and it basically says, here's all the cases that pertain to whatever case we're working on and all their references. So this lawyer, whether he was being lazy or I don't know, had too much work or whatever, he asked ChatGPT, I think it was ChatGPT that he was using, but he asked the AI to write the brief for him. And the AI output a very long and supposedly good-looking brief. So he took it and he submitted it to the court. And then the court called him in because almost all of the references for the cases that were in the brief they didn't really exist. The AI had made up the references because to the AI, a reference is just the name of an author, the name of a case, the date, right? And so it didn't look up actual cases. It just generated something that looked like a real case, even though it wasn't. So one important skill in AI literacy is learning to verify the information and double check the information that you get from the AI. That's why ChatGPT, if you use it at the bottom, it says ChatGPT can make mistakes. Please verify all important information. So another concern that is big when using AI is the idea of data privacy. So here in the United States, we have laws that protect student information, and it can get us in big trouble if we violate those laws. As an example, if a parent of a student calls me up and says, I'm paying for my son or daughter's tuition, and I want to know if they're going to class and getting good grades because I'm paying for them to do so, I can't tell the parent the student's grade. I can't give them any information about the student's progress in my class or anything without the student saying it's okay to do that. So I can't use ChatGPT to grade my students' work because I'm putting protected information into ChatGPT to ask it to grade students' work. Now, ASU, Arizona State University, has a contract with OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT, where all of the data that we have, that we use with ChatGPT, is in its own sort of protected space. And so now I am able to use it with FERPA protected information, with protected information, because I use it in that specific ChatGPT workspace that is for ASU. But I have my own personal account as well, and I can't put student data there because I would be violating the law, actually. And with businesses too, a business might ask the AI to help it come up with a marketing campaign or something, and so it gives the AI's information about the business, whatever, and now maybe some proprietary information ends up in somebody else's essay or somebody else's response that they get from the AI. So you really have to be careful about what data you're putting in there and how the data you give to the AI will be used. And that's different depending on which AI model you're using and who makes it and what their policies are. Another really important caveat is that AI often exists biases. And it's not that the AI has its own biases, but it's due to the fact that the AI was trained on data that was generated by humans, and humans have biases. So as an example, if a native Indian English speaker were to ask ChatGPT to grade or edit their essay, ChatGPT might tell them that some of the grammar they use or some of the vocabulary they used is wrong. Okay. And it's not really wrong. It's just, it's not what ChatGPT is used to, because ChatGPT was trained on mostly North American and British English, because that's where most of the material that it was trained on came from. And so there are biases against languages. Sometimes there's biases against women versus men, or gender biases, ethnical biases. So you just have to you have to understand that. And when we're using it with students, we have to tell students that there are these biases, and they have to understand that those biases might exist in the responses that they give. Another thing that I've learned, which you'll learn quickly if you use AI to any level, really, is that the AI often lacks the nuance of a human when explaining a topic, and so it might provide inappropriate responses. When I asked ChatGPT to give me an example of what an inappropriate response might be, it came up with this one. And if if I tell you that it's raining cat and dogs, even if you don't know English, you understand based on your common sense knowledge that cats and dogs are not falling from the sky. And you probably have some idiom or phrase in whatever language you speak that means a similar thing as it's raining cat and dogs. But to an AI that doesn't have that common sense knowledge, it might assume that cats and dogs are literally falling from the sky. And so it's important to understand that AI doesn't think about things and understand things the same way that humans do. There are many different ways that we can apply AI in the classroom, both with our students in terms of using it with students, and then also using it to improve students' learning experience by, for example, asking AI to help us generate lessons or other things. So one of the things that we can teach students to do in using AI with students is to have them practice fact checking. So there was a professor here at ASU who he teaches a class on international business ethics, I think it was. And so he had an assignment in his class where he asked his students to write an anti-discrimination policy that would apply for a global company, apply in multiple countries. And when ChatGPT was released, he took that assignment and he put it in ChatGPT, and ChatGPT gave him a response that would probably have earned a C in his class, he said. And so he decided, rather than letting students just use ChatGPT to write the response, he decided to change the assignment. So now he asked the students to ask ChatGPT to write an anti-discrimination policy based on whatever prompt they give it. And then they have to evaluate the response that ChatGPT gives them and explain why that response is good or why it is not good or where it's weak and where it's strong. And so that is a much better use of the artificial intelligence and a better way, I think, to teach students some of those concepts. Another way that we can do it is to use AI tools in class, allow students to use them to do things like brainstorming or whatnot. Um, we can also design iterative interactions, giving students a chance to interact with the AI on multiple occasions, allowing them to learn and allowing the AI to also learn over time. We can require students to be critical and to do critical evaluation, like I just mentioned with that professor. And I have an AI policy in my class where I require my students to account for any time that they use AI on an assignment. They're not allowed to use AI in an assignment unless I tell them it's okay. And then if they use AI on an assignment, they have to tell me how they used it. And there are, well, we at ASU, we have what we call live guides, but they're documents from the library that tell students how to cite different sources, and they have one on how to cite AI sources, and so I require the students to use that. You can also use AI in different assignments. So I saw one teacher who asked the students to give the AI a prompt and then do a role play with the AI. In the example that I saw, I think this was on an Edutopia article or something, but they were doing a historical unit, and so they asked the AI to take the role of a historical figure, say George Washington, and then the student would have a conversation with the AI George Washington, and they would learn different things, right? And they also got to practice, for example, fact checking whether the things that the AI told them was correct or not. I teach a class on building websites. And one of the things that students always have a hard time with is, what do I build a website about? Or where do I find content to put in the website that I'm building? And the content itself is not really important. The skill of building the website is what's important. And so I let the students use AI to get ideas and also to generate text that they can put um, in their websites when they build them. You'll notice a lot of my images, almost all of them, came from AI, generated by DALL-E. And this has been a real, I'm not an artist at all, but I can write a good prompt. And so I can get AI to generate an image for me that's pretty close to what I want based on the prompt that I give it. And so this has allowed me a lot of a better way to express myself when I give presentations, when I do, whatever it is that I'm doing and I need media. As I said, we're working on an AI-powered learning assistant. And so one of the things that AI is really good at is explaining things over and over again without getting tired, without getting frustrated, without wondering why the student's asking the same question for the 50th time, because AI doesn't care that the student has asked the question for the 50th time. So AI makes a great tutor and a great study partner. And another way that I've seen teachers use AI is to have the AI provide feedback much the way an editor would. This could be feedback on things like the structure of their essay and the organization of their ideas, the strength of their thesis statements. When I was teaching writing, I used to always have my students do peer review where they would read each other's papers and provide feedback. Now I can have the students, or a teacher, I don't teach writing anymore, but a teacher could have the students use AI as a peer reviewer, and then they evaluate the feedback that the AI gave them. So when I first started this journey, I was a little worried about what ChatGPT could do or what generative artificial intelligence could do. And I was worried that it might take away my job. But I was also excited, as I mentioned. And I also had a little bit of FOMO. But I think now, and I mentioned this in one of the sessions when I was there in Sharjah, I think now I've actually become pretty good friends with ChatGPT. And I think it kind of has, I think I kind of understand its personality. And so now I'm on it every day and I use it to help both my students and myself. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justin. We have about 5 minutes before the next presentation, so I think we have time for one question. Does anybody have a burning question? I have a bit of a burning question, and I'm a newbie. Okay.
Mhm.
I don't know if you would be able to answer this based on what you do now, but maybe based on your previous experience. So a lot of students are not using it to help them with their homework or their writing or to generate ideas. They're just using it to write their assignments. A lot of
Mhm.
institutions, especially here in Asia, don't have any policy for this. Any solutions?
Well, yeah, that's a whole nother presentation. But one of the biggest things is, and I guess a simple way to say it is, if you only focus on the product, what the students are going to create, then you won't know if they've used AI or not. The AI detectors do not work well at detecting themselves. And so even in my own classes, I've had to shift the focus on assignments and assessments away from the product to the process of creating the product. So I teach a class on web design, and the students have to create a website. That's something that generative AI is really good at. And so I have the students doing, I broke the project up throughout the semester into 8 different pieces. And so at each step in the process, they're submitting an assignment and I'm following along with them. I'm giving them a grade, I'm reviewing it. So by the time they get to the end, and all of a sudden, 3 weeks ago they had hardly anything and now they've got a perfect website, I kind of know something's up, right? So that's one thing that you can do. And the other thing that you can do is I always include a reflective piece. So I ask the students to tell me, how did they come up with the idea? What did they learn? What were the challenges? If they've used AI to generate everything, they won't be able to answer those questions. And so those are 2 things that I've done that have allowed me to sort of circumvent students' use of AI. But the biggest problem that we're going to have is that students, in order to evaluate the output of the AI, you have to have a basic knowledge. And so when students are copying and pasting from AI and they don't have that basic knowledge, they're not evaluating anything, right? In fact, there was a professor at a university, there was a student at a university who asked for a refund of their tuition because the professor had used AI to generate the slides and the notes they were using in their lecture. And the only way the student knew that was at the very bottom of some excerpt, it said, let me know if you want me to generate something. It was like they had just copied and pasted directly from ChatGPT without reading it or not reading it carefully. And so it's those types of things that are going to get that you'll be able to catch, but that will get you in trouble, or that will get students in trouble. So.